And you had a scoop this week, Dilipa, about Christopher Luxon and Winston Peters having picked up the phone to each other.
Yes, so this is, I guess, how little is leaked out about these negotiations, but finally by the end of the week we did find out that they have at least spoken to each other on the phone at least twice. And this is all relationship building stuff. So, it's a long way away from coalition negotiations, and it seems like everything is basically hinging on this November 3rd count of the special votes, because the thinking seems to be that that could alter negotiating positions. So what gets offered is going to depend on what the outcome of that is. So, for example, at the moment, we've got a kind of dynamic that we sort of haven't really seen before, right? National and ACT can kind of form a government, but effectively, they may need Winston Peters. If they don't need Winston Peters, that's going to be a different negotiating dynamic than we've had with New Zealand First in the past. Because if they want to have, ministerial portfolios, they want to have certain projects get off the ground, then they basically have, only one sort of negotiating option. So they can't, as in 2017, play off Labour against National in that scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm hearing that, Luxon wants to do a deal with New Zealand First in one way, anyway, to be able to, if somebody flames out, to be able to let go of somebody, to have that ability to sort of control his own caucus, I suppose, and maybe that's the case for the other coalition partners too. It's important, isn't it, to retain some flexibility in a government?
Oh, absolutely, and I think he's going about it the right way. But I think from his point of view as a new Prime Minister or incoming Prime Minister, he's clearly got to be the one who's controlling events. But this is his big test, how he carries this out. It's his first big test. So I think his approach of saying, I'm not going to talk to the media, I'm going to do this my own way in my own time, I think from his perspective is the correct one, because he doesn't want the narrative to be about what's New Zealand First want, what's Winston doing, what's everyone else doing. He wants it to be about how he's bringing together a new government of whatever shape or form.
And Annabelle, David Seymour this week, we have heard a little bit about him still pushing for this referendum on the treaty principles. Luxon says that is ACT's policy. I think that's all that he said this week. Our own polling shows that New Zealanders aren't particularly interested in this. Where do you see this landing?
Well, I think New Zealanders may not be interested in it, but ACT and its donors are. And so I don't think that this is an issue that Seymour will be willing to give away quickly. People have invested in him and in his campaign. There's important issues. I think it's probably part of a wider agenda to erode Māori rights, when it comes to issues and resources like water, like mining, and this is a first step in that. And his supporters and his donors are going to want bang for their buck, so I imagine he'll be negotiating very hard over this.
Yeah, and it's something that he's campaigned on. He will say, he has a mandate for that too. I want to talk a little bit about the sea change in Christopher Luxon this week, because he is stepping into, you've talked about this a little bit, Peter, but he's stepping into being a Prime Minister now from being a CEO and dealing with that daily scrutiny, reporters every day asking you pesky questions. It's very different, isn't it, from perhaps being able to put out your video statements, which I know, CEOs are very keen on, Dilipa.
Yeah, well, if we think of these coalition negotiations, Luxon made references to mergers and acquisitions as being a kind of precedent. If you think from the best corporate negotiators will always tell you what they're trying to go for is, enlarging the pie, some kind of solution, a creative solution that actually makes everybody sort of better off. Whereas typically in these coalition negotiations, what we've often seen is, a lot of horse trading. We want X policies, how much do we get, how many ministries do we get? And so I think, reading charitably into what he said, I think he's trying to approach things that way. But it's a very different situation because, the public of New Zealand, even your party members, they're not your, and the media and, the media and the public who find out about things through them, they're more like your shareholders than just the media sitting off the side reporting things in an industry context for some people who may or may not be investing in a company or trying to make decisions based on what might be happening with the company or might not be happening with the company. And people from the business sector who go into politics often always say there's nothing quite like it, because they're very different environments. You have a lot more public scrutiny. You don't have media things that are not a big deal if you're a company CEO and are suddenly a big deal if you're the leader of a country.
Yeah, well, Peter, I can see you both agreeing there. But what sort of Prime Minister? It's already clear that Christopher Luxon is going to be a different kind of Prime Minister. What kind of Prime Minister do you think he is going to be?
I think we started to see signs of that during the leadership debates, where he was very cool, very calm, very collected, and very focused. It's not always going to be that easy, as Dilip says, with the sort of cut and thrust of day-to-day government. But I think he'll try to maintain that persona, and I think to that extent he'll want to make sure that all of the components of his government, Act, New Zealand First in whatever way they are required, are dancing to the same tune. Now, whether he can achieve that is an entirely separate question, but I think that's the tone he'll want to portray. His message of getting the country back on track, by implication, the last government and its prime ministers were off track and off
the reservation.
Off focus, yeah. He'll want to be that cool, calm, collected guy who's just sort of nailed into it. The challenge, of course, is turning that perception into a reality. And we're not going to see the answer to that question for some months yet. Once he settles in, once the government starts to take stock of its duties, once the first crisis comes along, they're going to be the test moments. He's got to start right, though, with these negotiations.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk about Labour too, because we heard from Carmel Sepuloni there about Labour's unity, Annabelle, which is an easy word to say in moments like this, but it is much harder to achieve in a caucus that's just been decimated, isn't it?
It has, although to be fair, I think that, they've shown discipline by not criticising the team that ran their campaign, because they did a very poor job, as we've seen in the results. I was interested to see Carmel adamantly ruling herself in as a potential leader, and I think that there will be a period of calm over the next few months, but should Hipkins move on, and more than likely he will, that's when we'll start to see the tensions rise as the various people put themselves forward for leadership.
Didn't Carmel talk about this all being sorted before Christmas, which is the next few weeks? I thought that was quite a telling insight.
Yes, I wondered whether that was a technicality, though, that the Labour has to go to a vote after a loss.
But just because I agree with you, this has got to take some time, but rushing it before Christmas is a recipe for, whatever the outcome, for short-term disaster, I would have thought.
But arguably, National in 2017 maybe charts a path forward as to what an opposition should do, because if you think back to then, National, in retrospect, they actually did the right things at that time until COVID hit to set themselves up as a good opposition, right? They moved quickly to have Bridges as the leader, and then he just kept on hammering them on these, issues, deliverability, and those themes kept on going. Now, obviously, there were various scandals and things, and COVID came in. But actually, like now, when you look at the election result, we're sort of almost back to that time where they got to pre-COVID, and that's delivered the government. So, I mean, maybe that is a sort of path forward for them.
A little lesson as well. Okay.